I want you to think about something for a moment. In 2026 alone, just this year, U.S. border agents seized enough fentanyl to kill over 100 million Americans. 100 million. That is nearly one-third of the entire U.S. population. In 1 year, seized at the border. And that is just what they caught. Every single day, over 200 Americans die from drug overdoses, most of them driven by fentanyl that crossed the southern border from Mexico. That is more Americans dying per day than were killed on September 11, 2001. Every single day. Without a declaration of war. Without breaking news alerts. Without the kind of national outrage that 9/11 brought. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. Not car accidents, not cancer, not heart disease. A drug made in Mexico and smuggled across your border. But fentanyl is only part of the story. Because the organization behind it, the Mexican drug cartels, have grown into something that no longer looks like a crime organization. They look like a government. They look like a military. And for millions of people living in Mexico, they effectively are both. Today we are going to talk about what is actually happening south of your border, why it matters directly to every American regardless of where you live, and what, if anything, can be done about it. What are the cartels? And how powerful have they actually become? Most Americans picture drug cartels as gangs, violent but ultimately criminals running from the law. That picture is dangerously out of date. Mexico's major cartels, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, are transnational organizations with intelligence networks, military-grade weapons, drone technology, and annual revenues the DEA estimates at $20 to $30 billion a year from U.S. drug trafficking alone. To give you a sense of their reach, in February 2026, Mexican security forces killed El Mencho, the leader of the CJNG and one of the most wanted men in the world. Within hours, the cartel retaliated. Coordinated attacks erupted across multiple Mexican states simultaneously. Road blockades, arson, armed confrontations with the military. 25 National Guard members were killed in a single day. The cartel brought an entire country to its knees in response to the death of one man. That is not a gang. That is a parallel state. And it shares a 1,954-mile border with the United States. The fentanyl pipeline, how it gets from Mexico into your neighborhood. Here is something most Americans get wrong about fentanyl and the border. They picture people sneaking through gaps in the fence, carrying drugs in backpacks. That is not how most of it moves. Over 90% of the fentanyl that enters the United States comes through official border crossing points, legal ports of entry. Not because border agents are corrupt, but because of sheer volume. On an average day in 2025, over 200,000 personal vehicles crossed the U.S.-Mexico border at legal checkpoints, 21,000 trucks carrying cargo containers, thousands of buses and trains. Checking every single vehicle, every single container is physically impossible. The cartels know this. They exploit it deliberately. A small package of fentanyl, the size of a few sugar packets, can contain enough doses to kill thousands of people. It is odorless. It is colorless. It can be pressed into pills that look identical to prescription medication. It is the perfect drug to smuggle because the quantity needed to create a massive market is tiny enough to hide almost anywhere. Chinese chemical companies supply raw precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels. The cartels manufacture fentanyl in clandestine labs, press it into pills, and move it across the border in legitimate commercial shipments. And it does not stay in border states. It flows through America's highway system to every corner of the country. Rural Ohio, suburban Tennessee, small-town New Hampshire. No American community is geographically safe from this. CBP seized enough fentanyl in FY 2026 alone to kill over 100 million Americans, plus 152,000 pounds of meth and 28,000 pounds of cocaine. Fentanyl crisis is not an abstract policy problem. It is the most intimate, devastating public health disaster to hit American families since the AIDS epidemic. At the peak of the crisis in 2022 and 2023, over 111,000 Americans died from drug overdoses in a single year, the vast majority from fentanyl and synthetic opioids. That is more American deaths per year than the entire Vietnam War, more than the Korean War. more than any other cause of death for people under 45. The Trump administration's own presidential determination, issued in September 2025, stated plainly that more than 40% of Americans know someone who has died from an opioid overdose. Think about that number. 4 in 10 Americans. This is not happening in someone else's community. It is happening in yours. Fentanyl is particularly devastating because of how it enters the supply chain invisibly. People are not always choosing to take fentanyl. It is being pressed into fake pills and mixed into other drugs without users knowing. A teenager buys what they think is a Xanax bar at a party. A veteran takes what they think is a painkiller. Both are dead within minutes. The DEA calls this the fake pill crisis, and it has turned recreational drug use into a game of Russian roulette for millions of young Americans. Fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin. A dose the size of a few grains of salt is enough to kill an adult. And it is being deliberately hidden in pills and powders that look like something else entirely. What America is doing, and why it is so complicated. The Trump administration has taken more aggressive action on this issue than any previous administration. Cartels have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations, a legal label that unlocks sanctions, asset freezes, and the ability to prosecute cartel members under terrorism laws, rather than just drug laws. Fentanyl and its precursor chemicals have been formally designated as weapons of mass destruction. The HALT Fentanyl Act was signed into law, classifying fentanyl-related compounds as Schedule I drugs. At the border itself, military deployments have increased significantly. U.S. Special Operations Forces have expanded operations in the Latin American region. Mexico has deployed 10,000 National Guard troops specifically to the northern border under pressure from Washington. There have been real results. Fentanyl deaths are declining since their 2023 peak, and border seizures are at record highs. But the underlying problem has not gone away. Cartels are adaptive and deeply embedded in Mexican society and government. When Mexico kills a cartel leader, as it did with El Mencho in 2026, the result is not the end of the organization. It triggers a violent power struggle as rival factions fight to fill the vacuum. America learned this lesson in Colombia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Killing the leader does not kill the network. It often makes things more dangerous in the short term. Closing Mexico is America's largest trading partner. 800,000 people cross that border legally every single day. The two economies are inseparable, but cartels have inserted themselves into that relationship as a third force, one that answers to no government, respects no border, and profits from American addiction at the cost of American lives. The numbers do not lie. 200 Americans dying every day, 40% knowing someone lost to opioids, 100 million lethal doses seized, and that is just what was caught. Mexico is not America's enemy, but what is happening inside Mexico right now is killing Americans at a scale that would be called a national emergency if it were happening any other way, and it is happening every single day. If this gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening, subscribe and drop your thoughts below. Do you think America is doing enough to address this crisis? Or is there something more that should be done?